Let's talk about percentiles and how to find the kth percent of a data set. Now, what is a percentile? Well, you can see the word percent in the word percentile, so that can kind of help you out with the definition. Percentiles divide ordered data into hundredths, and they are a common measure of the location of data values within a data set. And mostly, they're used when you have a very large population. So for example, percentiles are used in standardized test scoring. If you would score in the 90th percentile on a standardized test, this does not mean that you got a 90% on the test, nor does it mean that you got 90% of the questions correct. In fact, it means that 90% of the other test scores, or 90% of the other students, scored the same or less than your score. So we're going to be using the phrase kth percentile. K is just a variable to represent any number for the percentile. So in this question here, what data value is the 15th percentile? K's value would be 15 in this instance. If we look at this histogram and we ask ourselves, where would the 15th percentile be? We know that that means we're looking for a value that 15% of the other values are the same or less than that. So we could guess that it was somewhere around here, but we don't know the data value for sure. So we really need to look at a data set. Now, there are 4 steps to finding the kth percentile of a data set. The first and most important step is to order the data from least to greatest. The second step is to then assign the values to the following variables. K will represent the percentile, and N will represent the total number of data values in the data set. The third step is to calculate a variable we're going to call I. This stands for the index or the position of that data value. And then we're going to use I to determine the data value in that position. These steps are much easier to see within an example. So let's look at this example here. Given this data set, find the 68th percentile. Now, finding the 68th percentile in this data set here means that 68% of the other data values are going to be the same or less than this value that we're looking for. So the first and again most important step is to order the data from least to greatest. Right now it's kind of a jumble, so we're going to order it with the least, 2 being first, and 40, the greatest number, being last. The second step is to assign values to the variables k and n. To find the value of k, we can just look back at the question. The question asks us to find the 68th percentile, so k is 68. N is the total number of data values in the set. So looking back at the set, we can count there are 9 data values, so n is 9. Now we need to calculate I, the index or the position of a data value. So we're going to use this formula here, I equals k over 100 times the quantity n plus 1. Now we know the values of k and n. We found them in the last step. So this is really a matter of substitution. We're going to plug 68 in for k and 9 in for n. We can simplify that parentheses on the right. 9 plus 1 equals 10, and I is going to be 68 over 100 times 10, which gives us the value 6.8. So 6.8 is the index or the position of this data value. Now we're going to use I to determine which value is at that position. So since I was 6.8, we're looking for the 6.8th position in the data set. Now don't freak out and ask, well, how in the world do you find the 6.8th term in the data set? There's going to be 2 cases here. I is either going to be a whole number or it's going to be some sort of decimal like this behind it. In the first case, if I is an integer. Now, this is not the case we're working at in our example. We'll come back to the example in 1 second. But let's say I is an integer. Then the kth percentile is the data value in that position. So pretend that our I was 4. We would look at our ordered data set. We would count over 4 from the left, and we would get 22, So our answer would be 22 is the kth percentile of the data set. However, our I was not an integer. Our I was 6.8. So if I is not an integer, then we're going to round that I up and down to the nearest integers, find the data values at those positions, and average them. So again, the value of I was 6.8. We're going to round that down to 6 and up to 7. So what we need to do is find the data values at the 6th and the 7th positions and then average them together. So in this data set, we can count over from the left 6 and then over from the left 7, and we get the 6th and the 7th data values, 34 and 35. Since there are two of them, we need to average them together. So the 68th percentile will be the average of 34 and 35. To find the average, we add them together and we divide by 2. This gives us a value of 34.5. So we've answered the question. The question asks us to find the 68th percentile, and we have 34.5 is the 68th percentile of this data set, meaning that 68% of the values in this data set are the same or less than 34.5.